ready. Thank you for joining us for this animation programming panel. This is the first one, I hope, of many to come. I'm very excited to be surrounded by a lot of great people tonight. I think it's going to be a great panel. Before we get started, a few things. It's going to be 60 minutes long, and we'll have two parts. The first one will go around more formally and introduce ourselves, very basic stuff, where we come from, what we do. And then the second part will be more free flow, and we'll touch on a few topics. We'll see how many, and we'll see where this takes us. So to get started, I'll start. My name is Laurent Delayen. I'm originally from France. I've been in the industry for 17 years, the last 14 at Epic Games. And I'm a gameplay and animation programmer on Paragon. So I guess we'll go to my left.
Sure. Hi there, my name's Jeff Herwer. I'm a principal software engineer at Electronic Arts, currently gameplay lead on EA Sports UFC, working on the third iteration of that title. I started at EA back in 2000 as a co-op student. I got a Bachelor of Engineering, or a Bachelor of Mathematics in Computer Science from the University of Waterloo. Did a co-op term out at EA and have been there ever since. I love gameplay and animation programming, and I'm looking forward to this experience.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Brett Pascal. I'm actually an animator crashing the programmers panel. I work at EA right now on the Frostbite team, and I've done that for the last 4 years. Before that, various stints at different studios, including an earlier stint at EA, working as an animator on different games. Now, I'm what's called a product owner of cinematic tools for the Frostbite team, and so my job is to work with 8 or 9 pretty solid engineers, animation engineers and the like, to make sure that the Frostbite animation cinematic tools are the best they can be.
Hey, I'm Bobby. I'm the lead animation programmer at Warner Brothers Games Montreal. Before that, I was at Ubisoft. And before that, I worked at IO Interactive, all the sort of animation kind of core tech. Before that, I was kind of more into enterprise programming, not really the nice game stuff.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Lowe. I'm a senior technical animator at Visceral Games. I've only been there for a few months. Before that, I was at Ubisoft Montreal, and where I worked with Bobby, and then before that at Bizarre Creations in the UK. As a senior technical animator, part of my job is to work on tools and automation scripts for animators. I also integrate animations into the engine using Ant, which is EA's proprietary animation toolset. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks. So my name is JC Delanois. I'm a gameplay programmer at EA Sports. I've been with EA since around 2004. I started out working on NBA Live. After that, I left and I worked on Mass Effect 3. And I was part of the team that started working on Mass Effect Andromeda. And for the last 2-3 years, I've been back on NBA Live. And yeah, that's it.
So to give a bit more context and sort of break the ice, the first question I will do is how did we get into animation programming? So we have tech animators as well, so it's a bit broader than that. But when I started at Epic and I studied animation about 14 years ago, it was rare to have an animation programmer. Typically it was done by other types of programmers. So it's an interesting story to see how we got into that. So I'll get started first. I worked on Gears of War, the first one at the time. It was around 2004. And we were a small team, about 3 programmers. And we had one programmer that did the cover system, another one did the AI, and I was doing the weapons, the camera, and then kind of all the moves that the player was doing. And that led to a lot of animation with weapons, with cover, sweat turns going over cover, and those kind of things. As we got more people into the team, they started taking over other things like weapon and camera, and I started specializing more into animation. And I've been doing that now for 14 years. The project before was Unreal Tournament 2004, and the tech that we had for animation was very basic. It was basically just plain animation, full body. Maybe we had a layer, but that was about it. And Gears of War, we really tried to push animation to the next level. And so it became a full-time job. And as we made more sequels in other games, animation technology got more and more complex. So now we definitely have a lot of animation programmers. So we kind of go around as well.
I guess I'll start even further back than you did. When I was probably, how old are you when you're in grade 5 or grade 6? I wrote my first video game back then on a Commodore 64. To show how old that really is, I started learning video game programming by, you'd buy these magazines and you'd type in the code from the magazine into the computer in order to play the game. And that was my first exposure to video game programming. It was just because I wanted to play these games and the internet wasn't a thing yet. You couldn't download them, so you get them out of these magazines. And you kind of start to understand, like, what does this push thing mean? What's going on here? And you start to understand how to do some coding just from reading that code. And it all started from wanting to play video games for me. And then I started to get enjoyment out of the creation process of just like doing kind of stop motion animation with characters flashing on and off on the screen on a Commodore 64, and it kind of grew from there. I wrote video games in my parents' basement all through high school, and went to university with the hope of becoming a video game programmer. Did the co-op term out at EA. I worked on FIFA as my first game as an AI programmer, actually, and what got me into animation programming was the games just weren't good enough in order to make them look intelligent or be fun without kind of getting really deep into the animation side. The animation side was kind of what was holding everything back. So I started focusing on animation back then. Similar to what you were saying, there was like a text table of animation names, and they were just called, there was an enumeration for every one, and they were just play anim on every one with tons of code everywhere. And I was part of a group of people that started moving all that stuff into tools. Eventually became this tool called Animal on FIFA, which eventually morphed into Ant, which we all use now. And I still, for me, animation programming is more of a means to an end. I want to make a really good game that has like a really good feel to it. And you can't do that without be really, really hands-on with animation.
So my story is a little interesting. So in the late 90s, I was selling cars. I drew a lot, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had a lot of jobs, got fired from several of them, but they weren't like, useful jobs. So selling cars, I found out about this animation school. I got accepted into an animation school eventually, and then I became an animator. I worked at a TV studio for a while on an ill-fated pilot that sort of never went anywhere. And then 2001, kind of around the time, I guess, Jeff started at EA. I started at EA on a WCW game. I think what was interesting for me is that coming in as an animator, coming from TV, it was kind of like an abstract thing to think about. Like, yeah, we just render an image and we see an animation play, but now there was all this other stuff that had to happen. Like, you couldn't just make an animation and preview it and see what you had produced. Essentially, you kind of had to wait in those days for, as Jeff mentioned, like somebody to like give the name of the animation, like provide that in code, like a string match, so it would play the animation. So I was at EA for several years, and then I got the opportunity to go work on this game called Turok at a studio called Propaganda. It was awesome. I worked with some pretty incredible people, but we also started using Unreal 3. And so the interesting thing about Unreal 3 was it was like my first exposure to data-driven, even though like at that time, I guess Ant was coming up. Unreal 3 was really my first exposure to a data-driven animation pipeline, and it was pretty amazing. Like you could go into Kismet and wire up an animation state machine, and like the next thing it went from like here's a bunch of animations, hand them to a programmer, like 2 weeks later you see it, to like within a few minutes I could preview my animation in the level, in the context. That became something that I got really hooked on. Like I always, I guess, imagined myself going to movies, but then this like iteration loop kind of hooked me in, and I was like, well, this seems a little more fun. So after working with that for a while, I bounced around a few different studios. I worked on a bunch of different genres, a bunch of different platforms, and a bunch of different tools. When I came back to EA, what was interesting is that EA now has this Frostbite engine, which kind of similar to Unreal offers a lot of those same workflows. And then my job just kind of accidentally evolved into something where it's more like, what would an animator want from some tools that they might want to work with every day, rather than explicitly making an animation for a game. And now, instead of having, like, you know, Laurent maybe mentioned before, maybe you didn't have an animation programmer, then maybe you had one or two, or maybe you saw Christian's talk earlier, where I think he, on his combat team, he had 2. I'm surrounded by like 9. So, sort of like the world's my oyster. Yeah. But it's a ton of fun, and that's kind of my story, and I will now pass the mic.
So my kind of route into animation programming was a bit more roundabout. My academic training was actually in computational intelligence, which back then wasn't very sexy, and now all of a sudden it's the big in thing, neural networks, particle swarms, that kind of stuff. I also taught render programming at university level. I taught the undergraduate, postgraduate course when I was doing this. But this was back in South Africa, and there was no games industry. So I kind of looked around once I finished, and I said, okay, you know, AI is the thing for me. I want to do AI. I applied to a few places, and IO Interactive in Copenhagen took a chance on me, flew me out there, sat me down, and I ended up on the crowd team, out of all places. And there I met a guy called Michael Butner, who's sort of one of the best engineers in the industry, in my opinion, like animation. I think he's like the granddaddy of motion matching, which is the new buzzword now. And so the first thing he said to me when he got this, like, you're new, you look smart, you can port the animation system to PS3. Oh, okay. That didn't end very well. So I was sort of trying to be an AI programmer for a long time and ended up just doing mostly animation at IO. After that, I kind of moved to UB Montreal. Again, I moved as an AI programmer. I said, okay, I'll do AI. Moved there. I think I was on the project for a month, and then the animation programmer left, and I was like, I have some experience. I'll do this. And I was the animation programmer. That lasted for around 6 months, and then I became the AnimDT, or TD, I guess, not the French version. So I guess I was probably the only technical director in Ubisoft's history that couldn't animate. I did that and animation programming on that project for a while, and I finally moved to Warner Brothers Montreal as sort of the lead animation programmer there. Now, my career is less gameplay oriented. I was lucky enough to start with Morpheme back in the day. And so my first animation system was pretty much cutting edge. I never got to see the old school ways and this and that. And then when I moved to UB, that was my first sort of experience with the old school. And kind of I was revamping it there, and I worked at Warner. It was the same thing. It's like I feel like I'm the traveling animation system salesman. Goes to a new place, builds a new anim system. My key thing is that on every project I get to, I kind of fight my way out of the programming team and end up sitting with the animators. I tend to prefer to think of myself more as a service to the tech anims, sort of like they're my customers, and all I do is I basically sit with them and, can you do this for me? You know, that kind of thing is what makes me happy, and that's kind of what I enjoy doing. And animation gives me the opportunity to sort of be very close to the art side of things, which I can't do myself. While still kind of pretending I'm a little bit arty.
So yeah, for the majority of like my career, I've been an animator and producing animations day to day. But gradually over the course of the career, becoming more and more technical, and that really sort of started when I was at Bizarre Creations. On the first project that I worked on, which was a game called The Club, which didn't really blow anyone away, but it was an interesting kind of game. We had maybe like 5 gameplay animators, and all of the integration was going through one guy. It was an animation programmer, and we realized at the end of that there's no way that we could continue with that. So we kind of started looking at Morpheme and Havoc behavior and all of these data-driven ways of doing it. And after looking at that, decided to kind of go with our own system for that. And so I sort of started to get involved with designing those tools and working with our animators to kind of teach them how to use them. And it's just sort of snowballed from there, where it's like I've gradually become more and more involved over time. When I was at Ubisoft, I did sort of similar things with Bobby. And then it's only within the last maybe 2 years that I've started kind of programming, if you can call Python programming. I don't do any runtime kind of stuff, but that was a situation where I could sort of see some opportunities to do some automation from the work that I was doing in animation, and I sort of proposed this to Ubisoft's central technology group. And they said, yeah, like what you're proposing is good. We'll give you an engineer, and you can design the tools, and the engineer will build them. Well, it turned out that designing the tools was a very kind of quick thing to do, and then I'm just sort of sat there waiting to kind of give this guy feedback on his work that he's doing, and I was like, hey, you know, I could help you out with this, like if you teach me how to program. And he's kind of fortunately like a really good programmer, and got me into that kind of stuff, and it's just sort of snowballed from there, really. So yeah.
My path was pretty direct. I started out working on independent games when I was in CEGEP in Quebec, which is like the schooling level before university. And I was making some 2D games with some friends of mine. We entered some games in the IGF, won a couple of awards, not IGF, but other competitions. And then it evolved into making games in 3D. I really got into making physics engines at the time. And I was also coaching a basketball team, and EA was interviewing to fill an AI gameplay engineer position. And I think I was a pretty good fit. I got hired really quickly. So I started out doing AI programming for basketball video games. And slowly I started taking on more features where I would do the AI side and also the animation side. And I really enjoyed working with animators. And I also felt like with AI, I always had a hard time selling the behaviors of my characters without doing anything on the animation side. Just pure AI was kind of lacking what I wanted to do. So I eventually started specializing more and more in animation programming, and that's a lot of what I do nowadays. And that's it for me.
So I want to go back to what you said, Brett, earlier. Your transition into our Unreal Engine 3 and how things were data-driven, and it changed the workflow and who gets to work on animation. It's also a very clear transition that we felt when we built that engine. As you said before, everything was mostly programmed. Animators would just throw an animation over the wall. You had to wait. Programmer would have to put everything into the game. It wasn't very involved because usually that programmer was not dedicated to that. He would be doing many other things. And then we built this anim graph, and then suddenly anybody without any programming knowledge could build little logic and increase complexity and just have more steps in animation, for example, with IK and things like that. But now there's this separation between like who builds the graph, who populates it, who manages it. Do you still need a programmer there? If it's only an animator that builds the graph, do we need to request features for that to work? So we have this organization, code, and data. And I think we all have different opinions slightly on this. So I'm curious to hear. I think we'll start with you, Bobby. I think you have some strong thoughts on that subject.
Me, a strong opinion never. So I'm of the standpoint that I empower tech animals. Like I said, I always fight to be sitting with the tech animals. I've always been put in the engine team. I always move out of there. Either I have to flip a desk or I force a producer to move me no matter what. But once I'm seated there, like the way I like to think of it and the way I build the animation systems, again, it's mostly from Morphine background. So I present all the tooling to them, and I work really hard to build separation layers between gameplay or AI logic and the animation to the point where if I can keep gameplay programmers away from the animators and tech animators, that's pretty much half my role, is to make sure that they don't come in and sort of fuck things up by saying, you know what, I want 3 frames here, and I want this to be 5 frames, and this has to be exactly 1.3 meters a second, or my code explodes. That's sort of, I'm the animation pitbull fighting back against sort of the gameplay teams. But on the flip side, I'm also kind of the UI, UX, runtime guy for the tech anim. So, you know, if they need new features, I'll build that widget, I'll build that search dialog, I'll build them whatever tool they need. I think the third part, and probably the most important part, and I think this is where a lot of these approaches start to fail, is a lot of times people will sort of build, especially programmers, we're very guilty of this, will build a tool and will say, here's your tool, go. You fucked up. Give that back. You're not allowed tools anymore. And what I end up preferring to do is, yeah, you can do that, and then that never ends well. So I end up just saying, here's a tool, use it, tell me when you struggle, let me know when there's a problem. I'll kind of sit there and I'll kind of peek over the shoulder and be like, what are you doing? You know, you could just do this, or you could do that. And the point I'm trying to get to is that we need to train people with tooling. I mean, there's a conception that, okay, it's an animator or a technical animator, so he's not technical enough to understand, and that's not the reality. I mean, Dan's learning to program. I mean, I know tech animators that are building the entire DCC export pipelines themselves. They understand logic, they understand that. So I think most of my role isn't to build cool tech features and build cool gameplay. It's more to sort of teach tech animators to program in a visual language. So our anim graphs, for example, that we built at Warner Brothers are extremely powerful to the point now where I'm super proud of this. I know a lot of programmers don't like that, but there's zero programmer involvement in realization, absolutely none. Programmers expose intentions like speeds, velocities, requested actions. All the realizations are 100% tech anim driven. We did a big tech demo recently, and I had next to no involvement, neither did any gameplay programmers. It took time to get to the point where the tech animators were comfortable enough to build these features and to have all the tooling available to them to do this. So I'm from the standpoint that data driving as much as I can is the right approach. I even did a rant 2 years ago at GDC with lots of funny pictures. You can look that up. It was part of the AI Summit, sort of my venting frustration about the state of data driving versus kind of this more, I don't know how to call it, like programmer scared, clutching onto control aspect. Again, as I said, it's my personal opinion. I know a lot of people disagree with that, and I think Jeff is actually of the exact opposite standpoint, I think.
I wouldn't say exact opposite. I definitely have some of that clenching onto and don't want to give up control of certain aspects of development. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, if in a perfect world that I know will never exist, I would be capable of doing the animation work, the design work, and the engineering work all by myself, and I would just put together the game, and it would be awesome. It would be rated 99 on Metacritic, and I'd be a millionaire. That's what I would like to do. That's my dream. But the reality, that's not the reality. It's never going to happen. I don't think, I agree with you that, separating it by discipline isn't necessarily the right answer. So you've got some animators that are very technical, learn scripting, are capable of putting together very complex graphs. You've got engineers that have a very good eye for aesthetics and design and stuff like that. And you've got engineers that are horrible programmers as well and create buggy code and don't listen to their animators or their designers and stuff like that. There's a whole spectrum across all disciplines, and I think what solution you take is a bit more dependent on the problem set and what the makeup of your team is and stuff like that. I've seen very successful projects where one of the smartest animators in our company, Simon, put together the entire state graph, which blew my mind how large and complex it was. He took responsibility for it, finalized the game, all that kind of stuff. And I've seen the flip side where a technical animator did the same thing and it was a complete disaster. If you step back and think about it, we've gone from a place where all of the animation content went in the game through code, and now you had to be a coder in order to do that. And now we've gone to a place where all of the logic in the game could be written by an animator using a visual programming language. What's really the difference between the two? One, it's written in a text editor. The other one, it's written in this visual programming language. As long as you have all the debugging tools and the engineering discipline in order to make sure that you're generalizing things and simplifying things and not making things overly complex, over-engineering things, it doesn't matter what the actual medium is for creating this content. It's all content at the end of the day. And I don't think there's a simple kind of one-size-fits-all for this kind of stuff. I don't think it's as clear-cut. I want to be able to put animations in the game myself, even though I'm a programmer, because I want to really understand how all the pieces fit together. And I want my animators to be able to do the same thing. I want them to be able to create the breadth of content once the systems are in place and we know that everything functions the way we want it to. But I want them to be able to identify problems and know when to speak up and say, hey, this isn't working right, and be able to identify why it's not working right. I think it's a lot more complicated and a lot more shades of gray.
So layman's thought on this whole thing was when I was mentioning the Unreal experience, right? So now here's a bunch of animators, designers, whoever could go into these motion trees and these like Kismet logic trees and stuff and just go nuts and squash each other's work. And I think it was kind of Wild West for us when we were working on Turok. Things moved way too fast, and I don't think anybody really understood the impact. Like the problems that you would get were like, if you don't teach the animators the tooling, they start asking for things that are maybe stupid, maybe not stupid, maybe they're like based in a good place, but they end up like, I know I was definitely guilty of this, asking for things that required us to write, well, not us, I mean like guys like my fellow panelists here, to write things that then made it really hard to take new integrations, which was a new thing we didn't even really know about. Like all of a sudden, UE3's coming out with new versions, and they've got all this new stuff like that we wanted to take on for the rest of the game. And it's like, wow, we wrote too many lines of code in the animation system, so we can't take an integration. And then now there's tribal war and all this different stuff between different places. So I think having gone through one project where we were working with the tools and we kind of did things the wrong way, and then we finally shipped that and started clean and kind of went back to a vanilla version of Unreal, we made smarter asks because we had learned. So I think teaching the tooling is definitely a #1 thing. And like Jeff says, if an animator or a tech animator understands the impact of what they're creating and the performance problems that it may cause, then it's possible that it can work. But I think a lot of the programmers that I've worked with in the past that are a little more clingy to, they're not clinging to it because, well, maybe they are. Maybe they're clinging to it because it's like an ego thing and like they want to own it. But I think more often it's more like they're clinging to it because they don't want to have to spend 3 or 4 months at the end of the project like fighting like problems with memory and performance. So I understand that, and I think that makes a ton of sense. So like if you are going to make really good data-driven tools and you are going to trust animators and tech animators to go build features, then you better make sure that they have a way of figuring out if they are screwing it up, and you better make sure they understand what they're asking for with the tools, for sure. Like we learned things a lot the hard way, and yeah, having a chance to do it over again would certainly not make those same mistakes.
Yeah. I think there's an aspect of knowledge and staffing. I mean, time is critical on a project. You have limited time, limited budget, limited team. And so you have to go fast and make good use of your resources. And animation is complex, and it's vast, you know, like locomotion is a complex thing, but you have certain types of interactions of physics, multiple characters, synchronizing a character with the world. And so an animation system usually will evolve, like you need to add features that are requested. And so if you segment your team too much, you have this bottleneck of an animator that doesn't know how to use the tool needs a feature, so we need to put a programmer to provide that feature. When you expose more of your engine, and we saw that in the Naughty Dog talk, you have technical animators that are able to make that connection where you don't necessarily need a programmer. And so you save a ton of time there. And we see that on our team, where we have a wide range of animators. We have animators coming from the movie industry, and they will do great animation, but they know nothing about the game. As soon as the animation goes into the game, how it works is a complete mystery and black box. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, people who are very technical, they understand a lot of things, and for them, having access to, you know, everything that the engine can provide, everything that the gameplay and the physics can provide, they can write new tools, they can write their own features without creating bottlenecks, basically. So I think we have to be careful when we try to segment too much the animation from the gameplay. Keeping it open and making it accessible really helps you in that sense. But you also have to be careful to not hang yourself with that. Like at the end of the day, you have to ship a game. It has to be performant. So you have to find a middle ground into what you give away and then what you end up shipping with at the end. And prototyping, what we saw with the Naughty Dog talk, seems to be a good middle ground there.
Lots of good arguments on both sides. I guess for me, one of the issues I had when I was working on games that were very code-driven is that when we were finaling at the end, it would always be just all the bugs are on the engineers, the animators are either not doing anything or they're just starting to prepare for the next title. And once we went to more data-driven systems, it just allowed us to share the load a lot more when we were finaling. And it's not only animators, also designers can fix a lot of stuff. My pet peeve, though, is when an animator is working on, let's say, an anim graph for a really long time, and then we're finaling the game and bugs come in, and then suddenly the bugs are coming to me instead of to the animator who put it together. So I think it speaks to having a lot of good debugging tools as well. That's super important. And also, sometimes it's just about putting tools in a format that animators like to use. So if I talk about an anim graph again, I think a lot of animators, when they're looking at transitions, they want to be able to scrub a timeline and just do that 1,000 times and see what's happening. So one thing we did is we just basically put a different UI on a lightweight sort of animation graph, and it helps animators to, I think it's more in a way that it's more intuitive to them. They're just looking at tracks and they can just sort of scrub the timeline to see what the transition looks like. So I think with simple tools like that, we could even put a junior animator who doesn't have much gaming experience on a feature and he can create super amazing stuff.
So, I mean, for me, at the first studio that I worked at, like I say, we built these tools, these data-driven tools, so that we had access to the state flow. And excuse me. And then when I moved to Ubisoft, on some of the projects that I'd worked on there, they were very all in on the code side, like the state graph is in code. And from the animation side, that's really frustrating when you're used to having access to the state flow and then you want to make a quick change to a transition or something simple. And you have to go ask a programmer, and in some cases have to wait for them to kick a build. And those builds could be hours before you then see a change. I definitely agree that you can't give it to everybody. I've been through the process of saying, let's get every single animator to integrate their own animations. And for some animators, they really take to it, like people say. And for other animators, even simple systems like decision trees, where they're just plugging in the animations, they just couldn't get their head around conditions and things like that. But I think part of it, you can mitigate the problems by building, by being mindful of that when you're building the tool. Yeah. So when me and Bobby were working on our kind of state flow system, or state graph editor, one of the concepts that we kind of came up with, which I'm sure is in use elsewhere, I think we've got a similar thing at EA, is the idea of this database where, like proxy database, where it's kind of like you swap out animations for something that already exists. So if you've built one AI character type, for example, and all of their locomotion logic is exactly the same, and all you really want to do is swap out the animations, you could just say, well, the non-technical animators only have access to that part of the program, and the more technical animators will let them build state graphs and do whatever else it is. I think the big argument for having data-driven tools is that there's only so many animation programmers available. Whenever people would say to us, no, this is all going to be in code, I was like, well, are you going to hire 20 animation programmers? Where are you going to find those people? So I definitely think it should be available. Whether you restrict access to certain people is a different question. Yeah. But I definitely think it's the way to go, just in general, to have those tools available for people.
I think what you were saying earlier is there's a context, there's different projects, and every game is different, every team is different, and you have just a wide range of things there. And we see that on Paragon a lot. We're trying to ship a hero every 3 weeks. And so we have very short dev time, and every character is very different. So to get around that, we built a template. The idea being that if a hero is pretty standard, doesn't need anything unusual, you can just plug animation, and that's it, you're good to go. And so that helps a lot the non-technical animators. They can get a character maybe 90% complete without help of any programmer, as long as it's not a crazy atypical hero. But at the same time, when we do have these cases of atypical heroes, the technical animators can go crazy and do all these changes very quickly. And we have these really short 3 weeks deadlines to release. Like, that's very important to get there.
I just want to touch on the last thing. There's a few things that you guys touched on that kind of, in a good way. I think Jeff, what you said was actually right. I think you're absolutely correct that it is entirely dependent on the people in the team. And I guess maybe my point across wasn't that we segmented. We basically allowed the two teams to work independently of one another. The gameplay programs could build a feature and expose the animation interface, and the anim team could then follow on to that, or vice versa. Another thing that's important to note, and I think we take it for granted, is not a lot of programmers speak animator. And not a lot of animators speak programmer. And I've been in a conversation where I've seen a gameplay programmer speak to an animator, and they speak over both each other's heads, and nobody understands what's going on. And the end result is problematic, and I think that's where some of this confusion is coming in. For me, I also feel that yes, we shouldn't be giving the tools to everybody. Some programmers shouldn't be allowed to touch it. Some animators shouldn't. But one thing I found super great was having the tech animators being the owners of sort of the realization part of it. And the nice thing there is that they were then directing the non-technical animators using animatories and getting better results out of the team than if it was a programmer trying to squeeze blood from a stone, pretty much. You know, trying to speak programmer and trying to get an animation result out. That's kind of why I've always sat with animators, is to kind of speak the same language, understand the same terms, you know, kind of be the bridge.
Do you think that maybe it's a pipeline issue or just how the team is organized? I completely agree with you saying, like, sitting next to an animator, working together. I think that's the key. And for our heroes, we have these hero reviews every day. 10 a.m., we start the day with that. We all sit down in a room. We have the designer, animator, animation programmer, special effects, sound. I mean, the whole team responsible for a hero. And we go through what the hero does. We have notes, and then we repeat. So we never have this miscommunication between design, and that's the gameplay. Basically, the designer will do the gameplay, and then all the other departments. And so maybe what you're saying, like, the issue is communication. Like, you need that communication.
I think the team sizes lately have kind of ballooned to the point that we are hyper-specializing people. I know that if I say DCC, half my team won't know what's going on. They won't know what that means. I know, you know, Max or Maya is this mythical thing that they push some buttons and an animation comes out, at least in terms of programmers. They've never used it. They don't understand how it works. They've never seen the process of building an animation, how many iterations go through, how many cycles, how much care is taken into a single keyframe, right? I think it's just that people are put in a corner and told, you need to get this feature done, this milestone. You're a programmer, you work on code, you produce code, you're an animator. I don't think with the larger size that we have this sort of... You guys all remember that on the smaller teams, you were doing a bit of everything. You know, you're doing rendering, you're doing animation, you're doing physics, sometimes audio, UI, tool, whatever. And I guess back in the day, a lot of tech artists were doing animation, skinning, rigging, you know, modeling, all of that. And we've sort of hyper-specialized now to the point where I think we've forgotten how other people work to some degree.
I think what's interesting about that point is that I feel like it's going, and now it's starting to change to go back the other way again because of stuff like Unreal and Unity and, well, in our case, Frostbite or Ant or whatever, where, like, now you can create a lot more in the same tool set. So, like, without question, we have to use data-driven as a means of creating stuff, because if we're gonna it's not too far where almost all the assets would be built in the game engine. Like, I mean, like if you've used Source Filmmaker, like you can animate the rig, like you can record it, but you could animate it, you could load a game animation on the rig. Like the whole process of animation could be done in the engine. Like that would be pretty amazing if all the tools offered you that. And then of course, you have to figure it out. But the best cases I've ever had, I mean, Jeff's one of these type of guys too, and JC, like in the old days, it was like, I think you, me, like Fergs, Tanner, like we'd be sitting over spreadsheets figuring out where dunks fit in NBA Live, eating Fruit Loops at like 2 in the morning. And now it's like a completely open place where so many people can affect so much change in a like fluid project. When I worked with programmers like a guy, Steve Rinch, that we talked about earlier, or any programmer that I ever worked with that we had a great relationship, they would like, hey, show me how to use Maya so I could even just like understand how you like export the animation. At least then I could, he could take assets and push them through. If you can do that, and if you can communicate it, or if you have like some kind of structure, I mean, I think you have to implement those types of things, because it's pretty much like the ball is already rolling, right? Like, I don't know.
Going back to something Bobby was saying, I find the segmentation is a little interesting, because our teams are structured much more like what Christian was saying, where it's like feature teams, where the animator, the gameplay programmer, and animation programmer are typically the same person, and the designer are a team on this particular feature. And typically, I like to see the programmer in that group be kind of the owner, because they're the ones who are able to interpret the design, come up with some technical design for it, and translate that into something that the animator can work with. But I don't see that segmentation between like gameplay and animation. They typically tend to be the same thing in most projects that I've been on. And the successful gameplay programmers are the ones that do both animation and gameplay programming, and have a good appreciation for the aesthetics of animation and the fundamentals of good game design as well. That's kind of the perfect storm of a programmer that we're always trying to find, and the ones that are very successful.
I'm going to jump in. So gameplay and animation programming is super important, and what Brett was talking about, like looking at how your animators work, is really important. I know there was a key takeaway at your talk last year where you were saying about just observe what your animators are doing and look for kind of automatable tasks. And quite often, like just by looking at an animator work, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that a programmer can go in and write a script and just save a bunch of time for animators. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Was like, so I mentioned before I do a lot of kind of automation stuff, and it's very easy to be driven to do that when you've had to clean up 200 turn-on-spot animations, and it's like programmers have all of the power to be able to deliver automation, but they've not had to go through the process of animating to really understand what it is that is really bothering the animators. So absolutely, like, you need to sit down with your animators. You need to kind of see what it is that they do when they're working, and maybe you'd look at that and then say, like, holy shit, like this is what you do, like.
That's why I think it's really important for engineers to actually put a lot of the content in the game themselves, at least the first time. A lot of what we do in terms of tooling is like, okay, I got to create this system and I got to create a UI in order to be able to enter the data for that system. I want the programmer to be doing that as a first step and have to be forced to iterate on that a few hundred times before they hand it off to an animator to do it a few thousand times, because there's no better way to sort of understand what automation possibilities there are unless you do it yourself.
Just a quick segue there. There is a little danger there with a programmer building the UI for the programmer. Animators are sort of used to a certain specific way of working, a specific tool chain, and a specific kind of UI and paradigms. And if a programmer does that, he builds, as we call it, programmer UI, and you know how much people love that.
Most of my animators hate my UIs.
So I was lucky enough that I was working at Warner Brothers with an animation director called Brent George, who I guess is doing stuff on iAnimate. And he was starting to teach me to animate in Maya, because I realized that for me was a deficiency. I can do plugins, and I've been doing plugins. I can sort of manipulate the camera a bit. but it's like understanding how they work, watching how the tools are built that Autodesk is providing, what they use every day. That influences a lot how I build UIs, and a lot of times I'll give them a UI that I'm like, oh man, this is super simple. You type in a hex value here, and then I just see like a glazed donut look, and then I know I've made a mistake, or the guys will be like, dude, like, no. There's a danger of the programmer kind of thinking something is very easy for him because he inherently understands it and animated. That's what I was trying to get at with the animatories and the. It's not so much it was segmented. It's that sometimes things that we think in different patterns. You know, I can try to draw. I'm not going to work out very well, but somebody else could do a very good job. Whereas maybe logic doesn't come as easily. You know, we're all different. We all have different strengths. And that's the part that we sometimes forget, that we're like, oh, but this is super easy. I don't understand why you can't do this.
Yeah. So we've reached the end of our time slot already. Went by really fast. Just some closing thoughts. I agree with your mention of segmentation. I think one of the themes just hearing you talk is if we segment too much, then we get into these problems. And so maybe we need to work more together, have more communication. And so you have less of, this is my vision of things, and it's more like, if I'm building a tool for you, we're on the same page, we work together, and then we don't have this, I do something, throw it over the wall, and then you just don't understand it, and it's useless. So on that note, thank you for coming, and give the camera back to you.